Welcome to Down Ancient Trails, the online archaeology forum of the Sharma Center for Heritage Education India. Brush the dust off long forgotten thoughts. Slice through time and space.
Listen to stories in stone.
Whispers of voices lost in time.
Build bridges across worlds.
Curious minds reach out to the past. And travel down ancient trails.
Okay, so basically, let me go to the further. So basically, in case of why we need the luminescence for archaeology, we are interested in many things. Okay, what are those things? Like how human evolution has happened, how human has migrated, how we know that human has evolved originated in Africa, then moved to different parts of the world. But what's the timeline of these things? Okay, so what's the timeline? And sometimes it may happen that parallel populations are developing. How can we distinguish, or how can we tell whether they are parallel or whether they are one after the another? That can be only based upon on the luminescence based on the dating, whether it's a luminescence dating or other form of the dating. So luminescence dating is one such tool. Further, we through the dating we can set the sequence of the events. Okay, like we can identify what are the behavioral changes which are happening. Man has started making the tools that indicates its brain size is changing, its brain is increasing slowly. Tool types have evolved over the time, and association of these tools with the chronology can tell me, okay, during this these all these changes happen during that particular time. So time is an important framework. Further, if I go, man, earlier it was a nomad, it was a hunter and a gatherer. But after that, it started civilization. So when these civilizations started, sometimes these civilizations started and abandoned due to natural calamity, due to several reasons, availability of the resources. We don't know. We have several examples. Harappa is there, Lothal is a part of Harappa. Other settlements are there. Further, man also started making the potteries and fine tuning its skills. These potteries or the skills are again when the men started using these things, the industries flourished, the trading started, and then navigation also started. So what are the timelines for these things? So in this perspective, the dating technique like luminescence is very important. Now, I would like to go to the luminescence dating. But before going to the luminescence dating, let us first try to understand what is luminescence. Okay. Now, from the luminescence, as soon as this word comes to my mind, the idea, the luminescence immediately clicks me light. Okay, luminescence means light. But does that mean that all lights are luminescence? Do you think all lights are luminescence? No, all lights are not luminescence. Actually, it's a luminescence is a property of is normally called cold light. That is, it is the light emitted by the cold bodies. Okay, what does that mean? Suppose you are getting the light from the sun or from filament bulb, but these lights are not the luminescence. This is another form of the light. These are hot body radiations. On the other hand, luminescence is the cold body radiation. Uh, to explain the luminescence, I have given one example. I'm sure most of you have played when you are young with the materials that glow in the dark. Normally, all of you say that radium. Okay, so what happens in that? You shine a light on the top of these materials. Okay, and when you take these materials in the dark, these materials glow. They appear to glow. I also used to play with these materials when I was young. Okay, so but actually, what are these materials? What is the special property of these materials which makes them so special? So normally you say it's a radium, but it's not a radium, it's a phosphor. These materials are called phosphors. Now the basic property, they will shine only when you shine light on them. If you don't shine light on them, they will not shine at all. Okay, what does that mean? That means these materials are gaining energy from the light you are shining on it and storing that energy. And when you are removing the light, that stored energy is being emitted. That stored energy is coming out. So this is the main purpose of these phosphors or these glow in dark materials. This is very important. But why we are discussing this? Why we are discussing such materials? We are discussing this because in nature also we have some minerals which show luminescence. Some of these minerals are quartz, feldspar, gypsum, zircon, and barite. Some of these materials have the properties which show luminescence. Although quartz and feldspar are extensively used in dating. Okay, so far from this discussion, what we have understood that these materials, these are the materials which first acquire luminescence from some energy. Okay, then they store this luminescence and again emit the luminescence which is stored by them. Let's try to discuss each of these phenomena one by one. Okay, so what does, so now you can see here, first is the it acquires luminescence or it generates luminescence. Okay, as I had already discussed, we have some artificial phosphors, okay, which are gaining energy and emitting light. But has anyone ever tried, when they were child, they were just playing around with these stars or the moons and everything? Has anyone tried that what happens if I give them the light in the room, some, because when I was a young, I used to give them light in under the filament bulb, and when I see them, they were not glowing very brightly. And so what I do, I just go outside, give it a put it in sunlight, and then again running come back inside and try to see that, and it glows very brightly. So why is this difference? That when sunlight is there, they glow very brightly, but when you show it in the filament bulb, under filament bulb, the light, they look very dim. They don't shine as bright as possible. One of the possible reason could be the intensity, but another main possible reason is the energy. You know that filament bulb has mainly yellowish in color, so low energies. But in sunlight, we have a complete spectrum going from red to violet. Up, it has very high energy ones also, ultraviolet, blue UV, and green also. These can stimulate the luminescence. So normally the energy of these range from 2 to 3 electron volt. Okay, so just remember this number. The energy of the light is around 2 to 3 electron volt. However, in case of the natural phosphors, we need a high energy in excess of 10 electron volt. What does that mean? That means that these materials which have energy of in excess of the 10 electron volts, okay, they need energy in excess of 10 electron volts. That means normal visible light cannot induce luminescence in these. So for such material we need high energy radiation. Okay, so for such material we need high energy radiation like X-rays, alpha rays, beta rays, gamma rays, which has energy in excess of 100 electron volt. I will describe this why there is different energy requirement, why we need energy in excess of the 10 electron volt a little later. So hopefully you can get these things clear here. Okay. Now I come to the storage. Before explaining you the storage in case of luminescence, I would like to explain it with the help of a beaker. Okay. Now, you know that any storage, whatever it is, it takes time to fill it. It is not instantaneous, like it just fills up like this. It takes some time to fill or empty out the storage. Like in case of beaker, if we are giving the water drop by drop, it is filling slowly. That means this storage defines my time. So this storage is the main thing. Okay, in case of dating also, the storage is the main thing. So if I want to find a time, how much time this beaker will take to fill, simply what I have to do, I have to divide the volume by the volume rate or the drop rate. Okay, so I can easily estimate how much time this beaker is taking to fill. Same thing is equally true when the beaker is emptying out. So I can take the volume and I can divide it by the drop rate, and I can find out how much time it take to empty out the beaker. Thus, we see both increase and decrease of the storage can be used for estimation of the time. Now, let me give you the example. In case of filling beaker, luminescence dating is the type of a filling beaker in which the luminescence signal increases with time. It fills up with time. On the other hand, the other radioactive decay techniques like C14, uranium-238, uranium-232, we know all these are radioactive elements and they decay with time. So if we know the initial concentration and if we know the present concentration, we can estimate the time by simple n naught is equal to n naught e to the power minus lambda t. So radioactive decay law equation. Okay. So if we know this, we have a storage, it takes a time to fill, we can use this storage for time estimation. Now, since we are dealing with the luminescence, we will proceed with the luminescence now. Okay. But this is not so simple. There are some complications which are always there. What are these? First limitation is it has some saturation level, means we cannot date beyond a particular time. It has a limit. Okay, so any dating system has a limit. In case of the filling beaker, the time limit is when the beaker will be full. You cannot date a system if it is full. Beyond that, so that defines the age range. Another important thing is, suppose someone gave you the beaker, and he tells you that this was the drop rate, you measure the volume and tell me the time. But you don't know the initial condition. You don't know whether at t equal to 0, beaker was empty or full. In this case, what will happen? Whatever age you will estimate from the total volume to the volume rate, that will be overestimated. That will be wrong. Okay. Another problem could be beaker could be leaking. Now, if the beaker is leaking, you can still correct for it. How? If you know the leak rate, then you can correct whatever time you are getting by using this leaking rate. So this introduces some complication in the regular measurements, so which we have to take into account. Another issue is, I don't know whether, like, I have just opened the tap and the beaker is filling. Somebody came and he put in something else, extra also. So if such thing happens, I won't be able to realize that whatever time I'm giving is wrong. Okay, so such things are possible in geology also, in any dating material which you are doing. So we have to be careful, extra cautious about these things. I will explain these in the later part of my talk, how these things are coming into the picture. Okay, now there is another possibility. Without my knowing, some this drop rate may be fluctuating. If the drop rate is fluctuating, then whatever time you give, that will be going to be wrong. Okay, because you don't know, you are measuring the instantaneous drop rate, but if in the past it has changed, how do you know? You won't be able to give the correct time. So this is also one of the complications. Another important and the most important thing is whether you are if everything is taken care, whether you are using the proper measuring instrument, whether your measuring instrument are well calibrated, your procedures are well calibrated or not. So we have to take extra precaution in this. So I will explain what I mean by these measuring procedures in the later. So in a way, the storage of the beaker is similar to storage in the luminescence. Okay, so I will explain the luminescence storage a little later. Let me go to the next part, that is the emission of the luminescence. Okay, what is the meaning of emission of the luminescence now? Emission of the luminescence means the signal is being emitted, but can you tell me whether signal is emitting on its own or some agent is required? We know that a crystal is getting energy from the alpha, beta, gamma, or some energy from the radiations. So it is storing that energy, but it starts emitting also. So whether it start instantaneously without my doing anything, or it is automatically getting means it I need some external force to do it. What is the reason for it? Can you tell me? Okay, and I will explain this phenomena a little later, what is happening here. If I see my old example, the artificial phosphor which I show the light, then I will realize that I just went outside, show the light, shine the light, and came inside, and it was emitting. I didn't have to do anything. So is it actually the case or not? Or I am actually doing something so that it is emitting the light? Okay, so at this point we can have some questions, I will suggest, so that if anything is not clear this till this point, you can ask the question now.
So if there are any doubts right now, we can finish that. You can type your questions in here and the speaker will answer it. And then we'll carry on. If it's okay, we just move on. Okay? Just
So is it okay, or
yeah.
anybody has any question?
Okay, I think that we'll carry on and then go on typing. We can get back to that at that point.
Okay,
I can
so
see some.
yeah, okay, so I move forward now. Just type in your question. If you have any doubt, just type in your question. I will see in between some time. Okay, and then I can answer those questions. Okay, now let me take you to the luminescence mechanism. I have given you a brief introduction to the luminescence. What are the things happening in the luminescence? But how it is happening, that everything is in this one slide. Okay, first of all, you must be knowing we have a crystals. Everybody of you, all of you are using crystals at home. Sodium chloride, your common salt, is having NaCl crystal. Your sugars crystals, diamond is a crystal. Like these, many crystals are around. Quartz and feldspar are the crystal. So what is the meaning of a crystal? A crystal simply means its atoms are arranged in a very order, perfect order manner. Okay, and there is no discrepancy in this order. If this is a situation, then what will happen? There will exist the means in case of physics, these form conduction and valence band. What is the meaning of these? Valence band is composed of all the valence electron, means all the electrons are below this level, and conduction band is completely empty. These two bands are the only place where electron can stay. That means if I and the gap in between is called forbidden band. No electron can stay in this, and in case of the natural crystal, this gap is around 8 to 10 electron volt. So if I have to excite an electron from this to this, and so I will need minimum 10 electron volt of energy. That's why I said that for natural crystal we need around 10 to 8 to 10 electron volt energy. But in case of the normal phosphors, which we are seeing, the glow in dark material, they have the band gap of around 2 to 3 electron volt. So that's why visible energy can excite those phosphors. Electron goes there and comes back and emit luminescence when they de-excite. But in case of natural phosphor, it is not possible. Another important thing is, if an electron goes from valence band to conduction band, it cannot stay in conduction band. It has to, within say few 10 to the less than 10 to the power minus 8 second, it has to fall back to the valence band and recombine. Okay, so that's the property, that electron cannot stay. The lifetime of this level is very small. It cannot stay in this level for 10 to the minus 8 second. So then how dating is happening? Dating is happening because of, or the phosphorescence is happening because of the impurities in the crystal. What are the impurities? Impurities could be anything, like some of the extra electrons, atoms, some foreign atom is present in the perfect crystal. Okay, or there is a vacancy, some of the atom is lost and their vacancy is created, or some foreign atom replace the lattice atom. These create the defects. What is the effect of these defects? The effect of this defect is, okay, this is how alpha beta can easily excite the electron. Now the effect of these defects is, like, they form metastable states within the forbidden band of the crystal. They form the states where electron can stay. Earlier, electron was not allowed in the forbidden band, but now there are states where electron can stay. So what happens when a ionizing radiation comes? It creates gives energy to the electron. Electron goes to the conduction band, and the remaining hole also starts moving. So electron gain energy, move to the conduction, and now it is free to move. What will happen then? It is freely moving in the crystal. Now some of these impurities are can attract the electron. Electron get attracted towards these sites. Okay, so what happens? They get trapped by these defect sites, which are called metastable states. Now, if the lifetime of this metastable state is small, they will immediately, can go up again and recombine with the hole to give luminescence. I will explain it now. Suppose, for the time being, what happens if my irradiation continues? What will happen? More number of electron will get trapped with time, more and more. So this is basically, these metastable states are my storages, as these are like my beakers. When they are empty, they were empty earlier, they start slowly they start filling, and now electrons are occupying the places since the crystal is constantly being irradiated by the ionizing radiation. So these electrons take place in the metastable states. Now, the lifetime of these metastable states vary from few seconds to billion of years. Wow, interesting, no? So these metastable states act as a timekeepers. The states which have a very low lifetime will immediately decay, means they will lose the electron. However, the states which have a very long lifetime, they will hold the electron for a longer time. So in such states, number of electrons constantly increases. Now you see, there is a distance between conduction band and these metastable states. Since over y-axis is the energy axis, that means if I want to take this electron to the conduction band, I have to supply some energy. Then only this electron can again go to the conduction band and move freely. So to do this, what I have to do? I have to supply some heat or light. So if a sample is heated, these electrons get free. They will start moving in the conduction band and then find our whole center, recombine with this whole center and give luminescence. So this is the luminescence signal which we are observing. Now, from this point, you see some of the traps are near the conduction band, some of the traps are beyond at a greater depth than the conduction band. Okay, so what is happening? The one which are nearer will need very small amount of energy. However, the traps which are deeper will need a large amount of energy. As a result, these can be excited even with the room temperature. This is the case which was happening with the phosphor, artificial phosphor with which we were playing. However, in case of the natural crystal, some of the traps are very deep enough that their lifetime is billion of years, and those traps can be used for dating. Now, one more thing has to be understood from this. Suppose I want to date using these traps. That means, first of all, I have to empty out these traps. Otherwise, I will get signal from these traps. I will explain you how we will do in the later part. Okay. So ultimately, what is happening? My luminescence is proportional to the number of the trapped electron. Whatever is the number of the trap. More the number of the electron, more will be the luminescence signal. Now, but this number of electron is dependent on the amount of energy received from alpha, beta, gamma radiation, or the amount of dose. Dose is nothing but energy per unit mass. So it is proportional to the dose received from alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. Okay. Also, since this dose rate is constant, so my luminescence is proportional to the time also. Ultimately, what can happen? Using this luminescence signal, I can estimate either the dose or the time. And hence, this is the principle of the dating which is normally used for luminescence dating. Now, since I have spent some time in this, some people may be having doubt. They can ask their question. I have already one or two questions, so I can see this. So first question is from Anthu. I'm sorry, it's difficult to pronounce. Athyanatha Kama.
I think
Mr.
Ilavarasan.
Yeah, okay.
Ilavarasan, I think that's your question. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what type of chemical reaction provokes the ions to be re-excited in the specimen? So basically, yes, when the chemical reaction is involved, then it's a chemiluminescence. But here we are not dealing with the chemical reaction. We are dealing with the luminescence of the crystal. So what we have to do is we have to supply the energy from an ionizing radiation, like alpha, beta, gamma radiation. What are alpha? They are particles. When you hit a ball to someone, he will get some. He will get hurt. Same thing is happening with crystal also. When you are hitting alpha ball, atoms getting hurt. How it is getting hurt? It is removing the electron is getting removed from it. So it's not a chemical reaction exactly. It's a like energy deposition by the particles. Okay. Second, how impurities in the crystal is responsible for the metastable bands. Okay, this is a nice question. Basically, what is happening now, like your crystal field is changing. Okay, what is happening? Suppose this impurity, suppose this is a substitution impurity, it replaces some atom here, and this impurity can attract the electron. Attraction of the electron means that the potential energy of the system will change slightly. But since it's a complete crystal, it cannot modify the complete band diagram. It cannot modify the complete conduction and the valence bands. Only thing what it can do, it can create localized modification in the crystal field. Okay, and as a result of this, the the metastable states, since it's an attractive force, the energy gets lowered and it came below the conduction band. So new state will be formed within the forbidden band of the crystal. So this is how it is changing. I can explain it more elaborately. Just take two atoms, try to combine these two atoms. Okay, then how the shells of these two atoms are falling on each other. Bring a third foreign atom, calculate, try to see whether the third atom shell will also overlap or whether it will fall in between. So it will be the simple answer to this question. I cannot see the question.
You have one more question from Pranshu.
Yeah.
As some electrons are deep seated, so will they move along with shallow seated electrons? Is it that all electrons get excited at same time, responsible for luminescence when external source is provided? Can you see the chat on the side, or should I read it out?
No, I can see. Wait.
Okay. I think it's from from Pranshu.
Okay.
The question from Pranshu to the board, to you.
Okay, let me see, because okay, yes, okay. Pranshu, as some electrons are deep seated, so will they move along the shallow seated electrons? Is it that electrons get excited at the same? No, see, these, as I told you, these are the localized defects. Localized defects means wait a moment, just something is happening here. Okay, so
okay. We have time.
See, these are the localized defects. Okay, localized defect means one defect is here, another defect is here, third defect is here. So they are distributed throughout the crystal. Only excitation force which is coming is the heat and the light. Okay, so if you are heating a system, all the traps which are at that particular level, which are near to the conduction band, whether it's lying anywhere in the crystal, if it feels the same amount of temperature, they will come out. But the deep seated will obviously need a higher temperature, so that, because they have some particular energy requirement. Unless that energy requirement is fulfilled, they will not be removed. Only the electrons whose energy requirement is fulfilled, they will be removed. Okay, hope this is clear.
Okay, you can continue, then we'll come back to the next set.
Okay, so another question is related to the ruby laser. So ruby laser, actually, in this case, I will say it's slightly modified. Yes, they are also solid state luminescence phosphor, but there in the laser you have to create the population inversion, and the amount of impurity is quite high. Here we are dealing with the impurity level which are very low, of ppb or ppm level, or even less than that. So means luminescence is truly a defect phenomena. Okay. Okay, so let me move on to the next part. So you can type in your questions as further. Okay. Now, okay. Now, as I said, when we heat the system or give light to the system, electrons get evicted, they recombine with the holes present in the hole center and give luminescence. Okay, so if the temperature is, there are some traps which are evicted at the low temperature. There are some traps which are evicted at very high temperature. What that means? That means as we increase temperature linearly with time, what will be happening? The traps which are at the shallow depth will come first and show a peak. Further we increase the temperature, the next set of the traps will come. Don't confuse with this, only there is a change in the scale of the graph here. So this one, another set of the electrons come. Further, if we increase the temperature, further set of the electrons will come and give us the luminescence peak. Now, depending upon the lifetime of the peak, lifetime of the trap, we have to see which will be suitable for dating. Okay, like this one. Okay, this we can use for dating. But to date, what we have to use? We have to use a particular temperature range and integrate that signal. And how it is done, I will tell you later. Okay. Now, similarly, in the same way, if we are giving light, we are stimulating with the blue or the IR light. In case in case of heating, we are slowly increasing the temperature. So we are slowly giving energy to trap one by one, traps of different depth one by one. But in case of OSL, we give a light energy in one shot. Suppose we stimulate with a blue light, the energy is defined by the photon energy. So whichever electrons which are fulfilling that energy, which they can be evicted, they just come out. And slowly their concentration decreases, so we get a OSL decay curve. This is called thermoluminescence glow curve, and this is called OSL decay curve. Okay. Now, let me explain you how the luminescence happens in nature. How the luminescence signal changes in nature. Okay. So, first thing which is happening is crystal is forming either from as a igneous rock, from the lava melt, or after metamorphic event. So some crystal is formed. Now all the traps are empty. There is no trap in the crystal, no electron in the traps. Okay, that means my beaker is empty. After the crystal crystallizes, there is radioactivity in the soil which is surrounding this crystal. Okay, so what is happening now? That this radioactivity is continuously ionizing the crystal and increasing by luminescence signal. So after crystallization, as the time progresses, due to the ambient radioactivity, my luminescence signal starts increasing. After some time, this rock or material, whichever is formed, gets withered or get transported. After withering, it gets transported or it gets heated. So what is happening? Again, it is while getting transported, it is facing sunlight. Or suppose someone is making pottery out of this crystal, these material. Then he has to heat the material to a very high temperature, around 600, 700 degrees Celsius. These two events, what these two events will do? They will reset the luminescence signal. Or it will remove all the electrons from the traps. Okay. These electrons, my beaker will get emptied again. Again, after getting transported, the sediment falls somewhere, crystal falls somewhere, my pottery falls somewhere, and covered up by the sand again. Now what is happening? Again, radioactivity is there in the surrounding. So that because of that radioactivity, again it starts gaining the luminescence signal till the time we go and excavate that sample and take out that sample for the lab. So if we analyze such a sample, okay, what I will get last resetting event. So suppose I sample collect the sample at this particular point, then what I will get crystallization age of the sample. However, if I am getting a sample at this particular point, I will get the age since last resetting event, which could be the either the transportation through the air or water, or the heating event, which the heating event faced during making of the pottery. So this gives the age since last zeroing. Okay. Now this graph compares how the luminescence dating stands in front of the other techniques. You can see there are significant number of techniques like 210A, which are comparable, but this technique is a geochemistry based technique, needs some time, a lot of time, okay, and a lot of precaution also. Radiocarbon has some its own limitation. Dendrochronology are limited in the time scale. Similarly, other techniques are there, obsidian hydration, but again, this can be applied to the places where it's possible, means where material is available. So, and luminescence dating has a quite large range. It can date a sample which has the age as low as 10 kilo year or 10 years. Also, it has been applied for the samples which has age of about 800 kilo year. And further, we are trying to go further deeper into the technique, and we are trying to explore whether we can extend the dating limit. So this can be applied for the another advantage of the luminescence dating is it is applied on the materials like quartz and feldspar, which is found everywhere. That means the technique can be applied almost for can be applied for a large number of applications. Okay. Almost it can date almost everything except few cases. Okay. So now let me explain you again the luminescence dating with respect to my beaker. I said I will take this beaker throughout my talk. As in case of the luminescence dating, in case of the beaker, we can find the time by dividing volume by the volume rate. In case of luminescence dating, we know that crystal is gaining dose at a particular dose rate, and if we know this dose, and if we can estimate the dose rate, we can estimate the age. So this is the indirect. This is the method which is normally used for the luminescence dating. Coming next, some of you may ask, sir, luminescence is proportional to the time. Why not why we can't use luminescence directly? But the luminescence response changes from sample to sample. Sometimes dose rate is also quite variable. So this methodology doesn't matter. But yes, if we find out the dose using luminescence signal, we can estimate the dose, and dose rate can be estimated using the concentration of the radioactive element in the soil. So this is the procedure we follow. We collect sample in pipes, in the metal pipes. Okay. We remove the outer 3 centimeter from the top and the bottom, and use the outside portion, because we expect that these could have seen light by somehow they might, because while closing opening they might have seen some light, so they might be sample the sample in this particular region may get affected. So we remove these, but we use this particular fraction of the sample for dose rate determination, for estimation of the uranium, thorium, potassium. Another, the center portion, what we do chemical processing and separate the minerals of our interest like quartz and feldspar. Okay. And then we use these quartz and feldspar for measuring the luminescence signal, and try to use the luminescence for dose determination. Once we know the the dose rate, we can estimate the age by simply dividing age as a dose by dose rate. Okay. Now, wait. Okay. So this is the simple strategy we follow. What we are having a crystal which is already having a dose inside it. Okay. What we do, we heat the sample or stimulate the sample with light. what it will do, it will emit some luminescence. We detect this luminescence and record the data, whichever is coming. Finally, plot the data on a graph. Next, what we do, since now we have already heated the sample, this sample is not having any luminescence signal inside it. It is empty. All the traps are empty. So what we do, we calibrate it in the lab. We give a non-regeneration dose. So in the laboratory regeneration dose, what will happen? Again, the signal will regenerate in the crystal. Again, we heat and give light, stimulate the with heat and light. We get a signal and we record it on the graph as R1. In the next cycle, again we give R2 regeneration dose, record the corresponding luminescence signal, give the regeneration dose R3, record the luminescence and make a calibration curve. Finally, this natural signal which we get in the first measurement, we interpolate this signal onto the graph and try to estimate the dose of the sample. Okay, so this is how we can estimate the dose, and it is the normal procedure used for the dosimetry. However, the procedure is not as simple as it looks. It, as I'm saying that for this one dose, it is giving R1, this is R2, and it is following a linear trend. But normally what happens, since we are doing such a cycling of the crystal, we are heating the system, we are giving light, so the property of the crystal changes. So its luminescence response of the luminescence response of the crystal also changes. In such cases, what we have to do, we have to correct these luminescences. So we use a bit more sophisticated protocol like single aliquot regeneration. In this protocol, we monitor the sensitivity, the response of the crystal after each measurement and try to take the ratio. If suppose there is some alpha times change in the signal of the measurement, there will be alpha times change in the ratio in this test dose signal also. If we take the ratio, that alpha will cancel out, and finally I will get the signal as it was needed. So this procedure is normally used for correcting that. Also, you can see I am giving TL 220 degrees Celsius before OSL measurement. This 220 degrees Celsius means I am trying to remove the shallower traps, the traps which are at shallow depth and which are not useful for my dating, which have a very low lifetime, and accessing the traps which have very high lifetime. So this is called single aliquot regeneration. Another case is when this sensitivity correction procedure is not possible, and there are still some changes happening, a lot of sensitivity changes is happening. We use a multiple aliquot additive dose. In this, what we give incremental beta doses to different sets, and we measure each aliquot only once. So there is no sensitivity change due to cycling. And finally, we have to extrapolate over curve and get the dose in this. So this is normally the procedure which we use for estimation of the doses. Now, at this point, I think we can have some questions. Okay, if anyone of you had some question, they might have typed. I'm going to see those questions now.
There are quite a number of questions. I think beginning with Ajit Singh.
Okay, please explain holes. The holes are nothing. It's as the name suggests, it's a vacancy of the electron. Now, you know that electron is a negative in charge. Okay, so when negative charge is removed, what will happen? Earlier atom was a neutral. Okay, now when I am removing an electron, it is leaving some deficiency there. That deficiency is called hole, and it is considered to be positively charged because nucleus is positively charged, and the number of electron is not equal to the number of neutrons. And hole movement can be defined that suppose the atom has lost its electron. Now there is an atom nearby. The electron from nearby atom can move to this hole. Okay, so now the second atom loses its electron, but it gains a hole. So this way, actually electron is getting transferred, but in this process we say hole is getting is traveling, hole is moving. Why we are using only blue light for stimulation? Blue light because it has high energy. We are also using green light. Some of the people are trying with a violet light also because it has still higher energy, but blue light is safest because violet is known to change the sensitivity. We have done some experiment with the violet, but it changes the sensitivity of the sample. So blue light doesn't change the sensitivity of the sample that much. So blue light is preferable. It is higher in energy, but on the other hand, it is not changing the sensitivity of the sample also. Okay. What is the difference between the TL and OSL? As I already suggested, if we heat the sample linearly with temperature, like in this case, I'm increasing the temperature linearly with time. If I heat the sample linearly with time, I get a thermal glow curve. In this is called thermoluminescence. In this, what is happening? At suppose temperature is 50 degrees Celsius, then energy is different. If temperature is 100 degrees Celsius, energy is different. So what is happening at different temperature, different energy. So the traps having that particular energy, they will only respond. Okay. In in case of OSL, what we are giving light. Now light energy is defined by the frequency of the light. You know na, E is equal to h nu. So if a particular wavelength like blue, it has a 440 nanometer wavelength. That means a fixed wavelength, fixed frequency. That means each photon is of that particular energy, around 2.6 electron volt. If you are giving 2.6 electron, whatever are the electrons which are having energy requirement less than 2.6 electron volt, which has energy trap depth less than 2.6 electron volt, they all will be coming out at once. All will be evicted at once. In case of TL, they are coming sequentially. In case of OSL, they are coming at once. So that's why I said when I am measuring during the SAR protocol, I have to remove that shallow electrons. Otherwise, if I'm doing OSL straight away, those shallow electrons will also contribute. Okay. So this is the main difference between TL and the OSL. Okay. Can you repeat the gist of zeroing phenomena once more? Okay. So zeroing means your beaker is empty. Okay. Let me go back here. Suppose I want to estimate the time from this beaker, that this is the volume, this is the drop rate, then how much is the time? Simply I divide volume by the volume rate, I get the time. But suppose at t equal to 0, there is some water in the beaker. It is not completely empty. Then what will I get? Whatever water acquired during the time t plus that extra water. So my volume will be larger. And if I try to estimate the time, my time will be higher. Same is true with the luminescence also. If my signal is not 0 here, if this is resetting is 0, this signal is 0, then only if my signal is 0, then only I can say, okay, whatever date I am giving of this resetting event, this zeroing event. Suppose my signal is here, it's not completely 0, then but this curve will shift here. That means whatever dose I am getting, that will be higher. Okay. And the age which I will be giving, I will not be giving this resetting age, I will be giving something else. So resetting is very important. That zeroing is very important. Okay. Hope this is clear now. Any other question?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. We can carry on.
Okay. So now you know how to estimate the dose. So should we continue with the dose rate?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we know that from where we are getting the dose rate. We are getting dose rate from the alpha, beta, and gamma. Where are these alpha, beta and gamma are coming? They are coming from the radioactive decay of radioactive isotopes, which are having very long lifetime, like uranium, thorium, and potassium. They are having the lifetime of the billion of years. Okay. How the radioactive decay happens? Nothing. There is a bigger size unstable nuclide, which, since it's an unstable nuclide, it breaks into the fragments into some particles and another nucleus. And in this process, some mass defect energy is released, some energy is released. That energy is shared by the particles which are emitting, like the helium particle. Always gamma is always emitted with the gamma is not emitted alone. It is always emitted along with some particle. Okay, so either it will be alpha particle or the beta particle. So the energy will be shared by these particles, and the energy is of the order of MeV. See, we need only 10 EV energy to excite, but now we are generating 4 to 5 MeV energy. These particles are carrying energy of the order of 4 to 5 MeV. So they are depositing a lot of energy. That means they are creating a lot of electron and hole pairs. That is good. Okay. Now, since these are long-lived nuclides, we are dating only in few thousand years. The concentration of the nuclide won't change that much. That means decay rate is almost constant. My dose rate is, as I mentioned, the dose rate should remain constant with time. So my dose rate is constant. Now this is only one nucleus which is depositing energy. But in the soil, as I mentioned, there are several isotopes. Uranium 238, thorium 232, potassium 40, rubidium, uranium 235, and its radioactive daughters. These all are decaying via alpha, beta, gamma radiations, and everyone is depositing the, means everyone is carrying a lot of energy. So that means, say 6 alpha, 8 alpha, some number of the betas which are emitting, all are carrying a lot of amount of energy and depositing that energy in the crystal. So a lot of electron hole pair are created, which are deposited, which are then accumulated within the traps. Okay, so these are the radioactive elements which are contributing to the dose rate. Now, I want to estimate the dose rate. How I will do it? Now I know that I have one uranium, it has so many daughters, and it is emitting, say, 6 alpha, 8 beta, 10 gammas, and total energy it is emitting is this much. So I can estimate the number of the decays in a year. Since I know I can estimate the concentration, then from that concentration I can calculate the number of atoms decaying in a year. Since this many atoms are decaying, this much energy is deposited. So energy per unit mass is nothing but dose. So if we know the concentration of uranium, thorium, and potassium, we can convert that concentration into the amount of energy deposited per year by that particular radioactive nuclide. Ultimately, we can estimate the amount or the rate of dose deposition per annum, how much energy or how much dose is getting deposited. So all these calculations have already been done. Now our main purpose is just to estimate the concentration of uranium, thorium, and potassium. These can be estimated using various techniques, like you can use XRF for the potassium, you can use uranium ICP-MS for uranium, thorium, you can use HPG particle counting, alpha counting. So there are several methods which can be used for the estimation of uranium, thorium, and the potassium. So once we measure the concentration, we know that we are having this much concentration. Say 1 ppm uranium will give this much dose per annum. So we use that conversion factor and we can easily calculate the age. Now, but before, more important is this thing. What is this? The range of alpha particle is 20 micron. That means alpha in in sediment or in say quartz crystal, alpha can penetrate at max 20 micron. It cannot deposit those beyond 20 microns. The range of beta is 3 millimeter. Okay, the range of beta is 3 millimeter, means beta can penetrate up to 3 millimeter, and gamma has a range of 30 centimeter. So normally we use the grain sizes of the order of 90 micron and the 4 to 11 micron grain. Okay, 90 in case of 90 micron, what is there? Alpha is stopped, so all the alpha will be stopped within the 20 micron. The interior portion is getting those mainly from the beta and gamma, because it's only 90 microns, so beta will also pass, gamma will also pass through it. So both will be depositing some dose in the inside, but alpha will be on the outside. So what in case of coarse grain, what we normally do, since alpha dosimetry is a bit complicated, we remove that alpha we etch the sample with the HF and we remove the alpha skin. So we are left only with the beta and the gamma dose rate. Another dose rate which is contributing is the cosmic ray, which is very small in amount and can be computed from the cosmic rays. For the size range 4 to 11 micron. Now in this size range, alpha will also penetrate, beta will also pass through, and gamma will also pass through. That means all the particles will be contributing the energy. But you see, alpha is carrying a lot of energy like 5 MeV, but depositing it within a very small distance, which is only 20 micron. That means all the traps which are near the alpha track, they get saturated. Our crystal cannot accommodate such a huge amount of energy within the small distance. That means a lot of our alpha energy get wasted. That means our alpha is not having 100% efficient, but on the other hand, beta and gamma is having 100% efficiency. So for calculating the dose rate for the fine grain, we have to estimate the alpha dose rate, but also have to estimate the efficiency factors, which is normally done in well calibrated alpha sources. Now you can ask where these techniques are can be useful. Like 90 micron, this is the normal coarse grain dating technique. Any sediment is having this grain size. This is the routine dating method which is used. However, in some cases where this coarse grain is not available, where or in case of the potteries is made up of the clay. Okay, so in such cases we cannot do anything. We have to use that 4 to 11. The clay size is 4 to 11 micron. So we have to estimate everything. Further, in case of the pottery, another problem is like I will explain that a bit later also. Like we use feldspar, and feldspar has a problem of fading. So we have to correct for that fading. So in addition to the estimation of the dose rate, another additional experiment we have to. So normally people avoid doing the fine grain, but if there is nothing, no other option is there, we can do the fine grain dating also. Okay. So at this point, again, if we have question, we can take them.
Yeah, I think you have a question from Obik Shankar.
Okay. During heating an artifact for testing, okay, is there any limitation of the temperature, or it varies from artifact to artifact? Which kind of, see, artifact heating, I am not going for the artifact dating. I am telling the simple coarse grain sediment dating or the pottery dating. But yes, we can go for the artifact dating also. But in that case, if artifact is a heated artifact, in that case, artifact should have faced around 200 to 300 degrees Celsius temperature. If it has faced say 300 degrees Celsius for say few minutes, the signal will be reset. But if has faced lesser temperature, that lesser temperature should be long enough that it can still remove the trap. Ideally, artifact should be heated beyond 350 degrees Celsius if it has to be dated. Okay. does the examination of coarse grain that gives a high resolution of the data? See, coarse grain, there is nothing to do with the resolution. The resolution will depend upon the distribution. First thing, distribution in the doses. Second thing, the distribution in the dose rate. Okay. Normally, we always say the more or less in luminescence dating, there is around 10% error. So with that is the resolution we claim. But in some cases, it could be 5%. In some cases, it could be lesser. It could be 20% also. Okay. Now coming further, like if your dose distribution is very compact, possibly you can get a slightly better resolution. But just based on the size, you cannot say whether a coarse grain will get a better resolution or a fine grain will get a better resolution. In case of the pottery, you get a very narrow distribution in the doses. So I will say in the potteries we get a very good resolution, but that's not a resolution. That is only that my error is very less, is minimal, because it depends on the sensitivity of the signal, how the sample responds to the dose. If the sensitivity is high, obviously my error is lesser, and you can say, okay, we get a bit higher resolution. If my sensitivity is low, like in the Himalayan sediment, most of the time, our error is going to be larger, even larger than 10%. We can't help it. Okay, so my signal to noise ratio defines my resolution in this case. Hope this answers. Any other question?
I think that's it. We can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you allow me, then I can go in the detailed part also, or if you say me, I can skip to the detailed part.
We'll continue. I think we continue.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So now this is the normal, now you can see this is the normal dating procedure. We estimate the dose using our standard dosimetry procedure. We estimate the dose rate from uranium, thorium, and potassium, and we can then estimate the age from simply taking the ratio of dose by the dose rate. Okay. But as I mentioned earlier, there are always some complications involved. There are some issues always which we have to look into to give a perfect age. Okay. So first one is the distribution of the doses. We see we have a lot of variation in the doses. That could be because of several factors. I will discuss what are those factors. So most of the time we get a lot of distribution. Now we have to pick which one is the correct dose for our system. So we have to choose our dose based on the statistical and some scientific arguments. Okay. Then in case of the feldspar, we observe that signal get lost with time. We call it fading. I will discuss that in a little bit. Sometimes we observe that there is fluctuation in the radioactivity and the water content, which can affect our dose rate. How, I will tell you this thing also. And also, there are the issues which are related to the measurement protocols also, which I will do. So let me move first to the distribution in doses. Now there can be several causes for the distribution in the doses. As I mentioned earlier, first one is the partial bleaching. As I mentioned that there is a possibility that beaker is having some water. It didn't face enough light. So different grains may have different beakers, or different grains may have faced different light or are not properly reset. In that case, it gives rise to the distribution. Another factor is the bioturbation. Due to some plant or the animal activity or insect activity, they can churn the top and the bottom layer of the soil. As a result, instead of getting a date of a particular layer, you are getting a date from variable date because of this churning of the sediment, because you have a contamination from everywhere. Also, another issue is beta heterogeneity, which I may explain in the later. Another thing is the sediment mixing. Sometimes you might have seen some sediment fissures are there, some dike formations are there because of the tectonic activities. These can lead to the mixing of the sediment. There can be several reasons for it. And these mixing of the sediment can result in, again, in the fluctuation of the doses and will lead to a larger distribution in the dose. Another important factor is the changes in the sensitivity during measurement. And these sensitivity changes could be Ellicott dependent, means they can vary from one sample subsets of the sample to another subset of them. As a result, we get a distribution in the doses. So I will go through each very quickly. Okay, first one, I will go to the partial bleaching. As I already told, there are chances that my beaker is not that my at time of the deposition my clock is not reset to 0. That means, and different grains are bleached to different extent. That means my different beakers are having different amount of water. Ultimately, when I am going to measure the time from different beakers, I am getting the different time. Then how I will be able to predict the actual age of the sample? Such a thing can happen. Suppose if there is a mud flow, like sediment is being transported as a mud flow. Okay, in this, sediment is not seeing the enough sunlight. All the grains are not seeing enough sunlight. So what, different grains are bleached to different extent. So they have an inherent dose in it. So finally, when we are measuring this dose, the signature of this inherent dose will always be present. Okay, and as a result, I can get a distribution in the dose. Similarly, is happening when a flash flood event is there. The sediment is transported so quickly that it didn't see enough sunlight. If sediment is transported during the cloudy season or the night or some tsunami events, in such cases, resetting is improper. My signal is not reset to the 0 level. As a result, I will get a distribution in those. So what is the best bet in this case? Say something is better than nothing. In this case, if I find out my sample is partially bleached, this can be predicted based on the over dispersion scatter in the sample. Okay, and there are some standard models which are already developed, which can be used for identifying whether the sample is partially bleached or a well bleached. If the sample is well bleached, obviously mean dose will be the best dose which you should take. But if it's a partially bleached, we know that the one which is the least dose is because of the best bleached grain. So this dose will give you the age closest to your event. So in such cases, we prefer to use the minimum age models. That over, we will choose the doses which are on the minimum side. First of all, what we do, we identify whether the sample is a well bleached or a partially bleached. If it's a well bleached, we measure the mean. If it's a partially bleached, we know that the minimum, we take the minimum, because the minimum dose is the nearest possible age to our sample. Rest of the others are having inheritance problem. Okay, so this is one case. Another problem was, as I said, bioturbation. In bioturbation, all everything is getting mixed. All the layers are getting mixed. This is something like someone is mixing, adding something extra, some extra water to your beaker. Okay, in this case, will you ever be able to get the exact time? No. So we do not sample such. So we should always, if you find a bioturbation, you should not use that sample. You should not collect sample from such site. Same is the case with the sediment mixing or sediment, where sometimes what happens during some tectonic activity, the liquefied fraction in the bottom get intruded in the top layers, and unknowingly, if we are sampling from this side, I can see only this phase. I cannot see that there is dike sitting in between, so I can sample that. But so normally we should avoid this such type of structures and should sample away from such structure. Otherwise, it will lead to the wrong estimation of age, and you will not be able to know why I am getting such a different ages. I should get this particular age, but I am not getting the correct age. So these such samples should always be avoided. Another is the beta heterogeneity. I may skip it, only I will just explain you different. In some cases, radioactivity is concentrated, like potassium radioactivity is concentrated in feldspar grain. That means different grains are receiving different doses. Like this grain is nearer to this grain, but farther from this grain. So since different grains are having different configuration of feldspar around them, each grain will be receiving a different dose, which results in the distribution in the dose. We have quantified, in fact, Mortekai and myself and Maya, so they have quantified this distribution. And now if we are getting this thing, we can easily handle them based on the minimum age models. Okay. So it's a bit confusing. I will not go too much into the detail. If somebody want, we can just talk later on. Okay. Another thing which is, as I mentioned, that if our measuring cylinders are not perfect, measuring instruments are not perfect, then you will not get a perfect age. Same is the case if the protocol, if you are applying, is not perfect. I already told you SAR protocol, in which a test dose is used to monitor the sensitivity. However, we have also observed that there are significant sensitivity changes occur during the first measurement itself, and these sensitivity changes are the random ones. I will not go too much into the details. Only thing I will say, because of these sensitivity changes, a lot of scatter can occur. However, we have found a correction procedure for this thing. Because of this, if we are getting such sensitivity changes, we can correct it. We call it natural correction factor. You can see without natural correction factor, there is a wide scatter, but with NCF, we are getting the compacted edge. Each time we apply LCF, we get a compact distribution. So some of the protocols need to be refined, and they are getting refined over the time, and we are getting the better and the better results. So our protocol should also be robust. You should also you should apply the protocols in a perfect way. Another important issue, as I told you, was the fading. Sometimes in case of feldspar, it is observed it loses signal. This is comparable to the leaky beaker. If the beaker is leaky, okay, so if the beaker is leaky, that means you are losing a volume when you are filling it. So if you want to estimate the correct age, you have to estimate the dose rate, volume, and this leaking rate also, and then incorporate the correction, and you will be able to estimate the time. Same is true with the in case of the feldspar. In feldspar, what happens? Because of the physics phenomena which is called tunneling, electron without going to the conduction band, they directly recombine with the holes when they are in the sediments. As a result, we lose signal because of this feeding issue. So if we want to use feldspar, or we have to, whenever we are using feldspar, we have to correct for this fading rate. We have to do a fading measurement. There is a standard procedure from Handley and Lamotte. There are other procedure from Auclair and then Kars and Wallinga, which has been refined, which are the refined procedure. So what we do, we measure we give a dose and try to measure the luminescence signal as a function of time. How the luminescence signal decays with time, and then you fit the curve and try to estimate the fading rate and use this fading rate for correcting my ages. So this is a standard procedure which, if anybody is more interested, they can look into the literature of this particular work, Huntley and Lamotte 2001. Okay. So another issue is related to the dose rate changes. As I said, you can estimate a correct age if your dose rate is constant, if your volume T equal to 0, volume is 0, and your measuring instrument is perfect. But if your dose rate is fluctuating, then you won't be able to estimate the age correctly. And there are some cases, some of the isotopes are mobile. They can easily leach with the through water. Suppose water is flowing, it can leach out the some of the isotope. As a result, like uranium is more soluble in water than thorium. So what will happen if water is flowing nearby? Uranium will slowly dissolve in the water and go away, and the thorium starts enhancing. And but since I am losing uranium, I will lose my dose rate. My dose rate will lower down as a function of time. So while making such a measurement, this is called disequilibrium in the series. We have to check for the disequilibrium in series. If there is a disequilibrium in the series, we have to correct for it. There is a paper by Ole, I think 1996. So you can go and check those paper, how disequilibrium can be tested and checked. Another important is the fluctuation in the water content in the sediment. Now we know that in the sediment we have water which is lying in the pore. Now when an alpha particle is coming, it is depositing in those in water also, in sediment also, or in my crystal also. Okay. Suppose there is no water, then all the dose will be deposited in my crystal. But if there is a water, then some fraction will be deposited in water. That means if my water is fluctuating, my dose rate is fluctuating. So this needs to be corrected, and you can see the Atkin 1985 book, in which it has told the procedure how to take into account the fluctuation in the water content and how you can choose the water content for the different climatic scenarios. Okay. Now, finally, again, our protocol should be perfect. Whatever standard procedure is given, it should be strictly followed. Like you can see, I am choosing a particular temperature here. It is not I can use any temperature here. This temperature is based on a preheat plateau test. So we have to conduct a preheat plateau test, estimate this temperature, and then use this temperature for estimating the age of dose from the sample or age from the sample. Also, other criteria like recycling ratio. Recycling ratio means I give a dose, measure its luminescence signal, and again give a dose and measure its luminescence signal. The ratio of the two, Lx by Tx, of the two doses should be within 10% of unity. If they are not, that means your this test dose correction procedure is not working perfectly, and you have to think about how to do it further, or you have to optimize your parameters for this. Another important thing is your signal to noise ratio should be higher. So in this case, like in case, sometimes test dose is chosen very small, but if you are choosing such a small test dose that you are not seeing the signal itself, then it will not correct perfectly. So you should always choose a dose where you could have sufficient good signal to noise ratio, at least greater than 3 sigma level. Okay, in this case, you will get a better estimate of the doses if you can take this consider this thing whenever you are making measurement. Also, we should always do the dose recovery test. What is dose recovery test? You bleach the sample perfectly, okay, under the sunlight or the natural sun, or within the solar lamp, or heat the sample, empty out the traps, then give a known dose and try to recover that dose by the procedure which you followed during measurement of the sample. If the dose you gave is coming within 10%, you are perfect. Whatever procedure you are applying is perfect. Okay. Another important thing is recuperation. Recuperation means whenever you are giving dose, okay, if you are not giving any dose, even then you are seeing the signal. If you are not giving, you are giving a zero dose, but you are seeing a signal, that means some deep traps are contributing to the shallow traps, and you have to optimize your preheat values to reduce the recuperation amount to less than 5%. Sensitivity check should be monitored. Okay. Further, signal contamination should be carefully handled. Sometimes, if you are measuring quartz, IRSL can be there. So you should carefully check whether you should wholly do the IRSL test, which tells me whether it's a pure quartz or there is feldspar contamination. Okay, so if there is a feldspar contamination, you should try to clean it repeatedly. Again, if the inclusion, if the contamination of the feldspar is within the inclusion of the feldspar quartz grain, you cannot do anything. So what you have to do, you have to follow the double SAR procedure. Means clean the feldspar signal first, and then use the quartz signal. Normally, feldspar can be stimulated by both by blue and IR, but quartz can only be stimulated by the blue light. So what we do in the double SAR procedure, we clean the feldspar signal by IRSL, since IRSL will not bleach the OSL signal or quartz signal. So we use the IRSL cleaning, then try to observe the quartz signal and use it for dose estimation. Okay. So finally, you can see how we stand. This was our beaker example and how our technique compares with it. So you can say our drop rate is similar to the dose rate, our volume is similar to the dose, leaking is similar to the anomalous fading, which I discussed. Then this saturation or beaker filling is like dating limit is like our dating limit. Sediment mixing and bioturbation is someone adding some water additionally. Partially breaching at T equal to 0 or beaker is not full. And our dating protocol and methodology is like our instrument which are used for measuring the drop rate and the graduated cylinder. So if everything is perfect, then only we get a perfect age. Now, some notes, tips for the field sampling. Okay, some of the people you are going to the field, so try to always choose a section which is clean. There is no bioturbation, nothing, no fissure features, etc. in these. Always use metal pipes which are closed at at both the ends and also can seal the moisture within it. Okay, don't use the plastic pipe. If you want to use the plastic pipe, see the transparency of that pipe with the help of a torch in the dark. So that if you are seeing any transparency of the pipe, don't use that pipe at all. Okay. Now, important thing is, suppose you want to collect sample from the top layer, and as I told, the gamma range is gamma range is around 30 centimeters. So your depth of the top sample should be greater than the 30 centimeters, so that it gets contribution from the gamma dose from all the sides. If it's not possible, that layer is important, then you have to apply a correction for the thickness. If you are using thin lenses, then also you have to apply that correction. You have to do some corrections to your gamma dose rate. Okay. Also try to choose the sand layers if possible, because sand layers are easily datable. It's always better to choose the layers. And most of the time, if it's a fluvial sample or a aeolian sample, sand layers are the best please sample. Just try to take out those layers. Your burden will decrease. However, if nothing is possible, then we should go for the fine grain, and we can also date the gravels, but with some limitation. Okay, it's still in the experimental stage, so we can do it. Okay. Always collect the sample pipe in a horizontal direction like this. Don't go put it vertically. Some of the people I have were asked me questions, how to sample, can I put it vertically? If you sample it vertically, obviously you are sampling many layers. That is not correct. That means you are sampling many events. So if you want to focus on an event, sample that particular event. Put your pipe horizontally always. Okay. Additional if you feel that sample will not be sufficient for the dose rate estimation or something, you can always collect the sample in ziploc pouches for the moisture measurements and the dose rate estimation. So it is important, you always have to measure the moisture. You can do it in the field also, or use a ziploc pouches, or we can take out the sample from, it's perfect, if your pipe is perfectly moisture tight, we can use the end portions for the moisture estimations. Okay, but moisture is an important, as I already told, water plays a crucial role. We have to measure the moisture always. Okay, then another important tip will be loose sediment should be carried carefully. Normally what happens when you are putting a pipe in the loose sediment, during transportation it mix up. So what you can do is you can carry some portion for the moisture measurement in the Ziploc pouch, and in the pipe put some tissue paper and the water on the top, so that sediment don't shake while transportation and it doesn't get mixed. Otherwise what will happen, outside portion is bleached by some sunlight, or it has faced some light, so it is getting mixed with the interior portion. You will get a scatter in the doses, you will get a partial bleaching, and sometimes zero signal also. So that should not be done. Also, always record latitude, longitude, elevation, depth below top surface, etc., as these are required for dose rate estimation. If you want to estimate the cosmic ray dose rate, Prescott and Hutton is the paper which is normally used for the dose rate estimation. Standard softwares are available which can be used for dose rate estimation. But for that purpose, you need these parameters. So wherever you are sampling, keep a record of these particular parameters. Special tips for the archaeology people. Some of the archaeology people comes me, sir, I have some surface finds. Can we use these surface finds for the age estimation? So never ever go for dating the surface finds, because it doesn't has any linkage. You cannot link it to anything. If if a pottery or your artifact is within the layer, then only you should go for it. Okay, then in case of the pottery dating, since the base and the rim are thickest, we should use these portion for dating the pottery. You will get enough material to date the potteries. From this portion you may or may not get, but from this portion you will always get. So always prefer to sample these particular portions for dating. Sediment layer associated with Paleolithic tool can also be dated. Like if you are finding the Paleolithic tools in a sediment layer, obviously you collect the sediment from that direction, that particular sample, that particular layer, and use that for dating. Also, some quartzite debitage, which are very thin and you expect that light has penetrated through it, can be sampled in the dark and can be used for dating. And heated stone tools which have faced sufficient heat, like a temperature in excess of 400 degrees Celsius, can be used for dating. Sensitivity can also be another important factor, is the sensitivity of the quartz, whether the quartz is a bright quartz or a dull quartz. This fluctuation in the sensitivity is an indicator of the climate. Normally we say when the sample is recycled in nature, quartz is recycled in nature, its sensitivity enhances. That means it's a qualitative indicator of the sensitivity. So if you find a bright sample, you will say this sample must have recycled quite a lot. That is, the condition were quite desert like, okay, or it's like arid condition. Or if you are getting a low sensitivity, possibly it's a fluvial deposit, or the climate is humid, it is not recycled that much. So it is a qualitative, but it can be used as an indicator, and we are working in this direction for some of the samples. Further, rock surface dating is the new technique in case of luminescence, which has recently been introduced. This can possibly be used for dating the rock surfaces. You can use the like your anvil rock for dating for exposure as well as the burial, for finding the exposure as well as the burial age. So you can try out these things. Centimeter size quartz, sometimes you find the gravels of centimeter sizes, they can be dated. What happens, as I told, alpha range is only 20 micron, beta range is 3 millimeter, gamma range is 30 centimeter. So in centimeter size object, beta and alpha are limited in the outer skin. So remove the alpha and the beta skin, you are left with the gamma skin. using this, you can go a little bit higher in the age, about 3 to 4 times. You can date a 3 to 4 times older sediment using such sample. So this technique you can use for dating. Okay. So finally, this is the group in which I am working. Professor Singhvi, Dr. Naveen Joel, these are already retired. Myself, then Vinayak, Monica, Haresh, recently joined new PDFs, Rahul and Sukumar. So all of these people are making a good group, and we are working here. And if you need any help, just you can mail me, and you can send the mail, and we can be in touch. Finally, thank you. Well, so we can have some question now. I think some questions are already there.
Yes, you have two questions or more questions coming up. So I think first one is from Pranshu regarding glaciers. Can you
Sir,
see
if
that?
we have sample from glacier, is it that the chance of getting proper age is low because the sample will be associated with the snow? No, in the glacial sample, only thing we have to worry about is the radioactivity. Now in the glacier, obviously if you are just sampling the glacial, not the glacial sediment, but the glacier itself, then obviously your sediment is very low, you won't be able to get the radioactive. If you are sampling the glacial deposits, in most of the cases, at least in the Himalayan glacier, the sensitivity is quite low. You can't help it. If you get the good sensitivity, obviously you are lucky enough, you will get a good age. But if it's a glacial sediment having low sensitivity, you should find the age, but always give, that will be, because signal to noise ratio is poor, you will get a higher age range. There is no harm in it. At least something is better than nothing. Report that age with the proper error. Okay, this is the like okay, this is the my age and this much is the error, and this is the best we can be done, which can be done. Another possibility, you can try, instead of OSL, try TL. Sometimes in some samples, if you are not getting OSL, you can still get TL. So try it out. If you get a good signal to noise ratio in TL, use the TL technique. Okay, has debitage dating worked for any particular site? Some people had tried, but not exactly. I am not sure of the literature, but myself I am trying. So hopefully I will be able to tell you exactly how it goes. But yes, I know that some people have tried the heated debitages. So you can look out for those works. Could you tell some specific case studies conducted in archaeodating specific? Okay, archaeodating. Specific cases, there are lot of archaeological dating of the archaeological sediment. You can contact Shanti for that. Our work is also there, like Sheila Mishra is there, and Sheila, with the Sheila Mishra, you can go that, look at that literature. Professor Singhvi has done a quite a lot of work using the dating and archaeology, combining the two. Shanti Papu and the Singhvi has done published a work in the Nature recently. So you can look at those things and you can take the reference. You can mail me and I can send you those references. So can you explain why coarser grain is preferred? Then coarser grain is only preferred because it makes our life easy. Since the dose rate, we don't have to do the extra experiment like alpha efficiency measurement and the fading rate, fading measurements in case of the quartz. Suppose you are doing the feldspar, then obviously you have to do the fading. But if you are doing fine grain, then obviously you are mostly doing the feldspar. In that case, you have to go for the alpha efficiency also and the this fading experiment also. Okay, can we use the method for sediment provenance? Yes, we can use it. We are, in fact, we are trying this thing out. Normally the sensitivity of the sample of the different provenance is different. So it is report. Some of the people have already published the data. I can send you that literature. So and we are also trying this thing out in our lab. Okay. Can you please briefly discuss multiple elevated temperature protocol, its advantages over post-IR, IRSL? I think Anil, I can talk to you later because here I wanted to concise only for the very brief question. But yes, multiple elevated means you have to heat at different temperature and then record the luminescence. So you will get a different, you will get information from the different traps, and then you can use those different traps for predicting your ages. I think the best one, if you want, Madhav is the best one who has actually applied this protocol for in the reality. What are the drawbacks of the dating interfluvial sediment? As area must be having two sources of the sediments traveling from the. It doesn't matter if the sediment is traveling from two different directions. Only thing is, once the sediment is deposited, it should be bleached at that time. There should not be post depositional mixing of the sediment. Okay, there should not be post depositional mixing of the layers of the sediments. If there is a post depositional mixing of the sediments, obviously you won't get the correct age. But if sediment are just coming from the two provenance sitting there deposited there is no harm, since if their luminescence signal is well reset during time of deposition. Okay, how is the possibility of you to use amorphous silica? Like, sir, the amorphous silica, see, the luminescence is the property of a crystal. So I'm not sure whether in the normally amorphous material don't show any luminescence. If in some cases it shows some luminescence, it is shown at very high radiation doses. In that case, I am not sure whether you will be able to get, because you won't get the luminescence signal out of it. Okay, if you are because it's a property of the crystals. If it's a amorphous material, you will get the luminescence signal only from some short order crystallinity within the amorphous material. The chances of having it is very small, and in that case your luminescence signal will be quite low, and that will be observed only at very high doses. So in that case, luminescence, I doubt the possibility of dating luminescence, but there is no harm in trying. Possibly for very old samples you can try it.